Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland with some unruly hair. But anyway, you can see I can prepare for these things so meticulously. I'm such a control freak. This video is about Mr. Benjamin Shapiro, one of my favourite people to critique. He's an intriguing chap. He's cerebral and he does not bear his erudition lightly. I think that's fair to say. And how he's wrong on Scandinavia, because he's often excoriating Scandinavia. There are people in the United States, democratic socialists, who often say that's the paradigm that we want to emulate here in the United States. Like in the 80s, the British Labour Party was talking about the Swedish model of social democracy, and they thought that was demi-paradise. So now, I'm not into the Swedish model. It has its flaws, and it's too left-wing for my tastes. It's not dreadful. It's certainly nothing nearly like as bad as what as Mr. Shapiro would have you believe. So here are his reasons for saying that the successes of Scandinavia could not be replicated in the United States. They are homogenous, he says. They're extraordinarily ethnically and culturally homogenous. So what difference does that make? That doesn't mean the country's going to be more prosperous or less so, but everybody knows. The implication of that is unmissable. It's about white supremacy. Because they're mostly white, they're rich. Okay? So the subtext is that non-white people drag the United States down. They're bad. They're poor. They deserve it. What else can he possibly mean by that? What's that got to do with it? And, you know, there are other very wealthy countries which are, say, multilingual. Switzerland, one of the richest countries on earth, got 4 official languages. Luxembourg, very wealthy indeed. And obviously it's got Luxembourgish, also French and German, 3 languages and all that. It's dribble. And actually the Nordic countries are not that ethnically homogenous. You know, Norway's at least 14% immigrant. Now, some of the immigrants are white, like Polish in particular, but there are Iranian Norwegians, Pakistani Norwegians, Chinese Norwegians, and so forth. Likewise, you'd find the same in Sweden, Iraqi Swedes, Serbian Swedes. They're white, but is skin color everything? Perhaps it is to Mr. Shapiro. There are Cambodian Swedes. I could go on. They're Ghanaian Swedes. They're Nigerian Finns, and blah blah blah. Denmark likewise. So they're not as homogenous as you might have us believe. You can look at the different states of the USA, like West Virginia, the poorest state in the Union, and a very white state, or where Mr. Shapiro has chosen to reside. If being multi-ethnic is so dreadful, why does he live there? California, one of the most multi-ethnic states in the Union, with one of the highest percentages of Hispanic people in the United States, and look at the part of California he lives in, very multi-ethnic. Is that bad? Does that impoverish a place? No, this is nonsense. And he says, we've been paying for the Nordic countries' defence budgets for a long time. Well, that's largely bogus. Finland is not and never has been a NATO country. Sweden is not and never has been a NATO country. Now, it's true that Norway and Denmark are NATO countries, but the United States doesn't give them money for their defence budgets. They spend their own money. Now, I'm not sure they spend the 2% target or not. I suspect not. Almost nobody does besides the United States. But the United States spends a huge amount, about 6% of GDP on defence. That's America's choice. And they do that because of the military-industrial complex. As Eisenhower, a Republican president, said, it's because of the defence contractor lobbyists saying, let's build this and this. And they obviously are in cahoots with a certain section of the media, like Fox News, to stoke paranoia and xenophobia, to demand the defence budget go higher and higher, that America spends more than the next several countries put together on defence, and yet it's never enough. It's always going up. Even these people who are fiscal conservatives, like Ted Cruz, demanding yet more money for defence, so-called defence, which is actually offence, attacking other countries. But America, after 18 years in Afghanistan, still can't even defeat the Taliban. The Taliban, which has not one tank, not one plane, not one drone, not one helicopter. I don't think they've got any artillery. I don't think they've got any rockets. And America's giving up. And other NATO countries too, including Denmark, the United Kingdom, they're withdrawing too. Despite all that help, is obviously a complete lack of courage and commitment. Not be willing to have enough people killed to win there. But anyway, I've gone off on a tangent. So the US has not been paying for the Nordic countries' defence budgets. Finland borders Russia, and Finland's got a tiny military. These countries are going bankrupt anyway. He said that several years ago. They are certainly not going bankrupt. Norway has got more money in the bank, I think I'm right in saying, than any other country on earth, especially per capita. A huge sovereign wealth fund. Not quite so true with some of the other Nordic countries. They're not going bankrupt. The United States is the most indebted country on earth. Now, admittedly, it's per capita, it's maybe not that high, partly because it's a large country, 320 million people, partly because it's a fairly wealthy country. But no, if some countries get close to going bankrupt, it's definitely the United States, much more so than the Scandinavian countries. So here he is pumping out misinformation. He's fooling his audience who just seem to lap it up. And they think he's got this razor-sharp mind. So presumably he knows what he's saying is twaddle, but he says it anyway. People do not like paying twice for a normal car. Well, yeah, I mean, car tax is very unpopular in the United States. Say in California, that's what brought down one of the governors, and Arnold Schwarzenegger took over there. But America's the land of the car, more so than any other country on earth. But many of these countries have really good public transport. Denmark's quite small. Public transport works really well there. Okay, the other countries are fairly large, not as large as the United States, but the populations are mostly very concentrated in the south, near the coast. So again, public transport works fairly well there. But anyway, the Scandinavians, they elect their governments, which are tax and spend governments. That's their choice. Wouldn't be the model I would go for. It's too high tax, too high regulation for my taste. And he's always on about this, that we can't have big government because that's overweening, it takes away your choice, blah, blah, blah. But then we'd have these SWAT teams bursting to your house in the middle of the night, dragging you off to prison if you don't do what they want, which in the Scandinavian countries almost never happens. It happens in the US a huge amount, like the war on drugs. People are not allowed to take narcotics. I know they're not allowed to take narcotics in Scandinavia, which has a less punitive attitude to these things. And obviously, fairly low rate of drug abuse, of drug addiction, of drug deaths, and all the rest of it, of violent crime, better by almost any metric than the United States on those issues. As for these SWAT teams dragging you away, what did Shapiro propose way back in 2003, if I'm not mistaken? Just that, all right? The Israeli army should grab the Palestinians, over 6 million of them, and out of their houses in the middle of the night, why not? Guys with guns, and drag you off for not doing what you want, for not leaving their homeland, where they've been for generations, millennia in some cases, that they should be booted out. And that even Arab Israelis, even an Arab Israeli soldier who's fought gallantly for Israel, who might be a fourth generation Israeli, be kicked out. An ultra-Orthodox Jewish person who was a draft dodger, an Israeli citizen, he'd be allowed to stay under Shapiro's scheme. Or maybe even not a citizen, just a resident, he'd be allowed to stay. Or someone who's only, say, a quarter Jewish, and that's patrilineal, he would be allowed to live in Israel, but an Arab Israeli would not. How grossly bigoted is that? And how flagrantly hypocritical is that? As he's a man who opposes big government, social engineering, state intervention. This racial and religious discrimination of the worst kind is only one down from genocide, what he's advocating for. All right. So next thing, he said they have slow economic growth in Scandinavia, which is largely true. Highly advanced economies don't grow that fast. We see Norway's economy is quite built around oil. They've diversified quite a bit. But when the oil prices aren't going up, they don't. Their economy's not growing so fast. They don't really need to grow that fast. They're sort of stagnating. But look how much the US economy shrank around 2008. The US has boom and bust much worse. Anyway, back to ethnic homogeneity. So if countries are ethnically homogenous, they are going to be wealthy. Is that right? Look at the Central African Republic. By many measurements, the poorest country on earth. Look at Niger and many other African countries where almost everybody is black. And okay, there are different ethnic groups within that. They have one official language, French in both those cases. I have some indigenous languages, but they are fairly ethnically and racially homogenous. They're not rich. No, they're absolutely bottom of the pile in terms of the Human Development Index. So this notion that being mono-ethnic enriches you is absolute nonsense. Mr. Shapiro can only be saying this, as I say, because he's saying whites are richer, are cleverer, or are more virtuous. What else could we possibly have intended us to understand by what he said? Look at, say, Bhutan, Nepal, Mongolia, some of these Asian countries, which again are almost ethnically homogenous. Now, it's true that in Nepal they do have more than one language, but Nepal is the only official language. Mongolia and Bhutan largely monolingual. But again, they are very far down the Human Development Index. So being mono-ethnic has got nothing to do with it. Look at Moldova, one of the poorest countries in Europe. Almost everybody's white. All right? Well, no, sorry, the very poorest country in Europe. Not in the European Union, in Europe. That's got nothing to do with it. And actually, immigrants choose to go to countries which are wealthier. Look at the Netherlands, France, United Kingdom. Some of the wealthiest countries in Europe, and they're some of the most ethnically mixed. Okay, the UK is about 15% non-white, France about 20% non-white. Look at the most ethnically mixed areas of those cities. London about 50% non-white, the most racially diverse city in the United Kingdom, and it's the most ethnically mixed. So his argument is completely nonsensical. It's just unutterably false. So he advances these specious, racially tinged arguments. He's always waltzing around the notion of white supremacy, which I think ill becomes someone who never ceases to remind us that he's Jewish, because white supremacists overlap very heavily with anti-Semites. So it's not the first time that he has propounded a egregious fallacy, like accusing President Obama of being an anti-Semite simply because Obama didn't do exactly what the Israeli government told him. Obama, who's a philo-Semite, who had so many Jewish people in his cabinet, who's praised Israel to the moon, who was trying to get Congress to send money to Israel to buy weapons when they did. And, you know, not all Israelis approve of everything the Israeli government did. That doesn't make them anti-Jewish when Jewish Israelis make a reasoned critique of their own government's policies. This really is preposterous. It's outrageous. And he seems to think that the anti-Semitism is ubiquitous. But, you know, the anti-black prejudice in the United States more or less doesn't exist, certainly doesn't lead to discrimination or bad outcomes. So, you know, you can't have it both ways. So, unfortunately, anti-Semitism is not chimerical. It exists, but he obviously claims it exists when it's actually not there. He's been the boy who cried wolf. People won't believe him when anti-Semitism really is there. And some anti-Semitic anti-Zionist discourse is anti-Semitic, some of it's not. Anyway, that's by the by. More about, being racially heterogeneous. Look at South Africa, the wealthiest country in sub-Saharan Africa, the Rainbow Nation, the most ethnically mixed country in sub-Saharan Africa, or in the whole of Africa, actually. And there we are. I know it's mainly because of mineral resources, but it proves yet again that really being ethnically mixed does not make people poorer, right? We're not going to be poverty-stricken if more ethnic minority people move in wherever you are. Look at some of the Caribbean countries which are very ethnically mixed. The ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire and Curacao, very ethnically mixed, or Saint Martin and so on, Guadeloupe. Some of the most ethnically mixed ones are the wealthier ones. So really, there's no connection here. It's not even an inverse relationship between ethnic homogeneity and poverty. It just could be either way. Anyway, so what else should I say? Anyway, if he really objects to the US government spending money given to other countries, he should be demanding they give not a cent to Israel. And Israel's big government has the draft. And Israel has a welfare state, partly because the US helps pay for its defense. So he's obviously completely inconsistent on these things. His rhetoric is shot through with contradictions. It's a farrago of falsehoods, evasions, and race baiting. So Mr. Shapiro, I agree with him somewhat. I mean, I do think the whole white privilege thing is overstated. He's not wrong in everything he says, but overall, I think he's a bit of a blot on the body politic, and calling people pieces of garbage, things like that. Always taking the moral high tone, it seems to me, being so judgmental, so Victorian. Not someone to my liking, but quite apart from disliking his political opinions. I hope I haven't gone in for too much ad hominem. Whereas, let's say, Stephen Crowder, who I disagree with fundamentally on quite a few issues, he does seem like he's a live wire. Probably would be good company, whereas Mr. Shapiro is not companionable. Anyway, perhaps that's by the by. But the bottom line is Mr. Shapiro is very badly mistaken on Scandinavia. I suspect he's not labouring under a delusion. There's not misapprehensions in his case, but he's just identified with free market fundamentalism, even though there are many lacunae in that, not on drugs, not on prostitution, not sure about on gambling with him. It's my money, I'll spend it however the hell I like. It's a free country, he says. He doesn't really believe that. In the United States, you're not allowed to buy drugs. Most states, well, I think all states now, you're not allowed to spend on prostitution. You're not allowed to buy certain things if you're under 18, like cigarettes or alcohol if you're under 21. You're not allowed to pay bribes, receive bribes. So, no, you're not allowed to spend it on anything you want. I would actually allow people to buy and sell on more things, buy and sell more things, goods and services than he would. So, Mr. Shapiro, I'm afraid to say he's a very malign influence, and the day that his cult disappears is long overdue.